let's get the cell phones put away. We've got X and Y intercepts. Yeah. What you've got real quickly, guys, X and Y intercepts. Please understand that this is something that you have learned before. To find an x-intercept, what you're going to do is let y equal 0 and solve. To get a y-intercept, you're going to let x equal 0, and then you solve. So you're always going to be doing those basic ideas. Whatever intercept you're asked to find, you let the other variable that was not named equal 0. So let's take a look at example 1. We're trying to find these x and y intercepts. Let's find the x-intercept first. We're going to let y equal 0. The equation becomes 3x minus 2 times 0. And here you get a very simple equation. 3x equals negative 6. When I divide by 3, I get a number. X equals negative 2. On Alex, you will plain and simply type in that number into a little box. And that number is going to tell you the x-coordinate where you cross the x-axis with your line. To find a y-intercept, to get a y-intercept, we're going to let x equal 0. And guys, as you do that, you're going to have the same equation, except now it's 3 times 0 minus 2y equals negative 6. Plugging in 0, like we said before, that just wipes everything out. You're going to have a very simple equation of negative 2y equals negative 6. You divide by negative 2, you get y equals positive 3. And you're done. One little word about Alex, though, when you're working on your homework assignments. Some of these problems will involve fractions, and I don't want you to get upset if that happens. You could let your calculator reduce the fractions for you. You might get things like, negative 4/3 or, 7 over 6, things like that. Let's go to number 2. It's a different learning topic, different learning target. I can graph a line given its x and y intercepts. Well, guys, one little thing that I do want to call to your attention, and this is especially important when you're working out the graphs on Alex today. You're going to see that for problems like this, the spacing is really one tick mark. It almost seems kind of funny for me to even bring that up. I bring it up because later on it won't be the same scale. And that's very important. We'll see that in our next problem. But every little tick mark there counts for 1. But on Alex, the spacing will be, they'll show you the number 2. So, they won't mark every single number down. But what they want you to do is make a graph of the line whose x-intercept is negative 4. They're giving you the x-intercept. Go to your x-axis. Go over here on the x-axis, put a dot there. That's physically what an x-intercept looks like. It's the point on the x-axis that the line will cross that particular axis. Similarly, for a y-intercept of negative 5, I think you can see negative 5 on the y-axis is going to be right between negative 4 and negative 6. You'll use your line tool to just click those 2 points, and then you'll get your graph. So really not a bad problem, hopefully something that you can do pretty quickly. But now, moving on to our third learning target, you're going to get 2 problems where example 1 and example 2 get blended together. They're going to say, I can find the graph of a line by first finding the x and the y intercepts, and then, of course, just graphing them. So here we have 2x minus 4y equals 10. We're going to have to do what we did in example 1. X-intercept, what equals 0, guys? What do we let equal 0? Y. We let y equal 0. And we can say here's 2x minus 4 times 0 equals 10. Hey, perfect example right here of a nice simple equation. I think right now you'd say, hey, it's just like example 1, 2x equals 10. You divide by 2, you get x is 5. That's your x-intercept. On Alex, you'll have to still type that number into the answer box. To get your y-intercept, however, I think you can already see something more, a little different, complicated is coming. Obviously, what equals 0? X. You always let the opposite variable equal 0. So it's 2 times 0 minus 4y equals 10. This wipes out. Kids will say, well, that's a fraction. Yeah, Alex will have more than its fair share of problems where you're going to get fractions for answers. Now, of course, you could, in a heartbeat, use your fraction tool, alpha y equals, and type in 10 all over negative 4. And you'd get negative 5 over 2. Now, negative 5 over 2 is the answer that you would type in if you wanted to use a fraction. I think it's just as common for kids to say, now wait a minute, I know if I took negative 5 divided by 2, I'd get negative 2.5. By the way, if you entered that as a decimal in Alex, you'd get credit for that too. Okay? But the graph is what I want to show you that's so different. See, I'm going to bring Alex up real quickly. This is homework 2.4b. And, if we just take a look at your graphing for your second homework problem, you can see the tick marks are going by one step, and that's all good. But when you get to the third problem, like the third problem on our, and you know what, I guess I'm going to have to put some graph in here. I'll just, put something so we have something to talk about. But this is what I really want to let you know. Number 3 and number 4 on Alex, the scale is different. I want you to take a look right here. And if we don't talk about this, I think some kids are going to get upset. You can see that your tick marks are no longer going by 1. They're actually going by, what do you think? 0.5. A half in this case. Because you could see that over here's 2. Like in the middle right here would be 1. So this first tick mark that I'm putting my little crosshair on, that's a half. This is 1. Here's 1.5, and here's a 2. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. When we're graphing here, that could really get kids a little bit confused at first. So I'm going to try to mimic the graph that you're going to see. So you could see more or less that, you'd see a 2 over here, and then you'd see like a 4 over here, right? So here's 2.5, 3, 3.5, and here's 4. So, then up here is a half, 1, 1.5. This is a 2. And up here would be like a 4. You get the idea. But you can think, do we even have enough space to graph everything out? Well, I definitely think we do. Look, to graph an x-intercept of 5, you can see here's a 1, there's a half, there's 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. This would be 3. They won't mark it. 4, here's 4.5, here's your 5. On your computer screen, you'll actually have more space, but put your x-intercept right there. Negative 2, and then just a half step down would be right here, because we're really just going by steps. Every little tick mark is a half. So that's something to watch out for. If we don't tell you about that, I think kids are going to say, why am I getting this wrong? Okay, so that'll be your third and fourth homework problems. Let's go to the back and real quickly review something that I hope you know. When you've got parallel lines, guys, parallel lines from geometry, usually kids in a heartbeat will say, oh, the lines never cross or touch. And you're absolutely right. You're perfectly correct. But there's something more. If two lines are parallel, they have the same slope, right? They're always going to have the same exact slope. If you have perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. Opposite reciprocal slopes. Now, of course, you would have known from geometry last year that perpendicular lines do cross. In fact, they make 4 right angles when they do cross, just like that. But talking about their slopes, it's opposite reciprocals. And the fact is, there are 2 words at hand. You have to think about doing 2 things. So let's just say that I gave you a slope of, say, 2/3, and I want to find the opposite reciprocal. I've got to do 2 things. I've got to change the sign, and I've got to flip it. So what would the opposite reciprocal be? -3/2. You got it. Change the sign and flip. Let's say that I gave you -1/4. What would the opposite reciprocal be? +4/1, which is just going to be a 4. And likewise, I could give you something like a 7 right here. What's the opposite reciprocal of a 7? -1/7. See, I think sometimes kids really focus on the reciprocal, the flipping, which you need to do, of course, but just as important, equally important, is changing the sign. So again, when you are parallel, when you have 2 parallel lines, it's the same slope. When it's perpendicular, it's opposite reciprocals. So we're going to do 2 quick problems here to get you going, and then we'll let you start. So we've got a line, 3x minus 6y equals 4. You have to answer 2 questions. What's the slope of a parallel line? What's the slope of a perpendicular line? And here's the driving force behind these problems. You've got to get y equals mx plus b for this line. You got to get the slope first. So you need to get y alone. Is y alone right now? No. Let's get it that way. What should I do? Minus a 3x. You're right. Good. Minus a 3x. We'll have -6y. Here's -3x plus a 4. Now what? Divide. Yep, you got it. Divide everything by -6. What's going to happen? -3 over -6. You could use your calculator to reduce it. I hope you don't need to. A negative over a negative is a positive. 3 over 6 becomes 1/2. 4 over 6, well, it's a negative. You'll have a negative answer. Okay, but tell me about the slope. What's the slope here? 1/2, right? It's the number in front of x. So what's the slope of a parallel line? What do you think? 1/2. Kids might say, how do you know that? Look at the top. Parallel lines, same slope. Whatever slope you just found, it's got to be the exact same thing. Perpendicular lines, what do we get? Opposite reciprocal of it. What do we get? -2 over 1, which is just -2. Okay? You've got to take the opposite reciprocal for perpendicular lines. Opposite reciprocal means you've got to do 2 things to that slope. Change the sign and flip it. All right, let's take a look at our last one. -2x plus 8y equals -3. Let's solve to get y alone. So we could get y equals mx plus b. If I have y equals mx plus b, I'll know what my slope is for this line. What should I do? Add a 2x, right? So I have 8y is equal to 2x minus a 3, then what? Divide everything by 8, right? Now 2 over 8, you're going to get 1/4. You'd reduce it. Here you get -3/8. But if I've got y equals mx plus b, by the way I do, what's your m for this line? 1/4. It's the number in front of the x. So what's a line parallel? What's its slope? It's got to be 1/4. It's the same slope as the original line. How about the perpendicular line slope? What's that? -4 over 1, which in Alex, you don't want to write it that way. You always have to reduce your fraction. It'd just be -4. So that's it.